Now, before I get started, I want to preface this by saying I know there's going to be trolls and lurkers, people who I never hear from at any other time, who will suddenly feel inspired to shoot their mouths off in the comments section. Today's moment of truth will be about people just like that, but before we get into today's morning briefing, there's something else I'd like to talk about. And on this one, if you don't have anything positive to contribute, then just be quiet. If there's one thing I've learned in my 15 years of interacting with people online, it's that the people who are hating and complaining or throwing shade at other folks the most are also the ones doing the least. So I want to say that any trolling or cheap attempts at cynicism will incur being blocked. You've been warned. I'm going to do something I haven't done in several years. The last time I made a video where I advocated openly on behalf of anyone's venture was TBA's documentary 7 a.m. That was some years back. Well, this morning I have something else I want to speak on. This Saturday, Brother Tariq is going to be conducting the FBA Reparations rally in D.C. I hope everyone will support it by attending or contributing however they can, and we can all do something tangible for the cause. I made a video years ago and recently reposted it on this channel, Why Roger Ailes Isn't Going Away. In that video, I pointed out that wealthy white supremacists like Joseph Coors and Rupert Murdoch have always looked for ways to mobilize public opinion against black people and to implement policies meant to harm us, and that when there's some sort of change they want to see in the society, the first thing they do is to look for someone to write a check to. Well, the good news is this isn't a game that only wealthy white supremacists can play. Black people can also achieve significant results, and for far less money. As I said in that video, black people will never get anywhere unless and until we put money behind the things we believe in. If you're not able to attend the rally for whatever reason, that's no excuse not to support it. The bad guys are being backed by corporate racists like Joseph Coors and publisher William Regnery, as well as the billionaire tech investor Robert Mercer who funded Breitbart. That's who's backing the bad guys. The Black Grassroots has you. The link to the Rally for Reparations website is in the description. Thank you. And now, the moment of truth. You know, it's just a fact that the most popular policy in the United States is anti-black racism, and that policy mostly takes the form of economic deprivation. So when you start saying things like reparations, well, naturally that's going to be among the least popular policies in the society. Not because the nation can't afford it, not because it's not right, but because anything that is going to be of benefit to the masses of black people by definition is automatically going to be attacked and assailed. Now, there's going to be huge opposition to reparations from the white right. Naturally, they are the voice of the white establishment after all. But as we've seen with the Los Angeles City Council racism scandal and in other places, white supremacy is quite sophisticated. White supremacy benefits primarily those who are classified as white, but they've always understood the absolute necessity of recruiting and maintaining a buffer class of non-whites to push the white supremacist line for them. Irish were not classified as white in the 19th century, and yet who were the ones lynching and murdering black people in the 1860s during the draft riots? Who was the founder of the Ku Klux Klan? Nathan Forrest, who was Scots-Irish. See, the same groups who will tell the world how they were mistreated by the British didn't hesitate to join in with the same violence as their own so-called oppressors once they were in the U.S., and that's because they understood that unlike in Europe, where their societies were defined by ethnic divisions, mostly class, in the U.S. there was this flat definition of white because the U.S. was a multiracial society. And the society's stratification was not on the basis of class or what European ethnic group you came from, but on the basis of skin color. Whereas in Europe, there was nothing but other white people to marginalize and impoverish, in the U.S., there were black people. And because there weren't enough Anglo-Americans to control all the black folks, white power needed reinforcements. That's why they started making nice with other ethnic groups who were coming in from Europe. That's why the definition of white has been changing and expanding almost from the very beginning. Because it had to. This was where the idea of the melting pot came from. It had nothing to do with accepting different skin colors or even different cultures. It had everything to do with taking in the different ethnic groups of Europe and creating an overarching idea of whiteness in order to hold black people in check. Now, white power didn't do that by choice, any more than they had black soldiers in the Revolutionary and Civil Wars out of choice. They did it out of necessity. And this pattern has been the pattern for 200 years. Take newly arrived non-black immigrants and haze them just enough to let them know how rough things can be if they're not on board with the racial pyramid, and make it clear to those groups that there's a racial hierarchy and how you can get in good with the white powers that be. And everyone understands, because the United States has made it very clear, that if you want to get in good with the white powers that be, you got to show that you're on board with the racial pyramid and that you're going to do your part to make sure that black people are held at the bottom. And of course, it wasn't just the Irish. All other subsequent groups that came into the United States understood this exact same requirement, and more often than not have gone right along with it. Anti-black racism is the unifying principle of American society. It's the glue that holds the entire white supremacist scheme together. But they don't want people focusing on that. White supremacy understands that one of the best ways to muddy the waters is to have people who are classified as people of color push the white supremacist party line for them. This way, white power can point to these people of color mouthpieces and say, well, they're the ones saying it, so it must be true. See, it's not just us. And of course, the people who do that will not come under any sort of scrutiny. In fact, they'll be rewarded for doing so. As reparations continues to be a central issue of black politics and increasingly national politics, you're going to see that the most vocal opponents won't be the white right, but rather groups classified as people of color. That's where the loudest and most vociferous opposition to reparations is going to start coming from. They will, of course, say that they had nothing to do with slavery, their people weren't even here, etc., etc. And some of them who think that they're particularly clever will say, well, I know what racism is about, and you don't see me talking about reparations. Now, here's what you say to that. You say that your people came to the United States to take advantage of the wealth generated by our ancestors' uncompensated labor. You may not have owned the plantations, you may not have carried out the lynchings, up until the late 20th century anyway, but you came here to benefit from the plantation's profits and the racial order put in place by anti-black violence. And since you volunteered to be here, that means you volunteer to take on the country's historical debts. Choosing to go to another country is no different than choosing to buy a house. If you see a house for sale on the block and that house is richer than the others and has a lot nicer things to it, and you decide you want the 2-story, 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath home, then you must also accept that if that house has any liens on it, you got to take responsibility for that too. Now, if you decide that you don't want to pay someone else's debts, then don't. But understand that if you choose to live in this house, it has a huge debt attached to it, and there's no way to get out of it. And when you come here to enjoy the amenities made possible by slavery and the subsequent oppression of black people, then you also become responsible for those debts. I, as a black man, cannot go to Germany and tell the German government that my taxes shouldn't go to pay Holocaust reparations. What black immigrants ever gone to Germany and been able to pull that one off? Do you think the German government would care if I said that, hey, my people were being oppressed before the Holocaust and were being lynched and our churches firebombed at the same time the Germans were mass murdering people, so why am I paying for anything? Do you think the German government would care if I pointed out that our oppression is still going on in the U.S., so as a black immigrant to Germany, my tax money shouldn't go to pay for something that our people had nothing to do with? Do you think that there would be any Jewish Holocaust survivors anywhere who would support that argument? Of course not. Nobody ever says it's wrong that black people's taxes should go to Native Americans or Japanese Americans put in prison camps during the Second World War or to Holocaust museums in the U.S. So why is it that when the most aggrieved, most mistreated people in the history of the world point out what we're owed, suddenly everybody thinks that they should have veto power over it? You don't get to make an a la carte argument when it comes to a nation's debts. Now, you already know that you're going to be seeing the Michelle Malkins and the Amy Chuas, people who claim that race doesn't matter, while at the same time they've made careers out of constantly pointing at their skin color and saying, this shows that America's not racist, take it from me, look at my skin color. Those fork-tongued liars who always pull that racial trick, we know that they're going to be whining about reparations. But you also better expect to see a lot of folks on the left who suddenly are going to be saying, well, we've got to speak on this too. Expect to see all the major networks and newspapers pushing that line. Expect to see the Al Sharptons and the Jason Johnsons and the Ta-Nehisi Coates. They are not going to say, don't do reparations. They're going to do the next best thing. They're going to say that, well, anything that white power agrees to, that can count as reparations. Why, when you think about it, anything can be reparations. Well, if anything can be reparations, that means nothing is reparations. Because you see, the people who do that whole anything can be reparations canard, they're no different than the racist on the right and the center who say that, well, the NBA is reparations. Welfare and food stamps, which are primarily used by and benefits white families, well, that counts as reparations. That's reparations. The root term of reparations comes from the word repair. If somebody is mutilated or hideously injured in a terrible car accident, that person is going to be suing. They want reparations. That means repair. Now, when that person makes their lawsuit, do you see the insurance company or the city or whomever cutting a check for everybody in town? Of course not. Reparations means to repair, but you repair the person who was wronged, not do some blanket nonsense for everybody. So we need to make sure we keep our eyes and ears open when you have all of these meat puppets the white supremacy is going to be bringing out and say, well, here's some people of color who oppose reparations. Getting others who are not strictly part of the oppressor class to be crash dummies for the oppressor class, that is a very, very old trick. It goes back a couple thousand years. Because if a system of oppression is going to stand for the long term, it cannot be an obvious system. You know, where it's obvious who the oppressor is, because a system like that also makes it obvious who has to be overthrown. So if you want to dial people in to be oppressed for the long term, you have to confuse their internal politics by sending in agents and turncoats, miseducating some of their own people to go back into those communities as the enemies of their people. And you also have to structure and set up dependable elements within the society in general, who are not part of the oppressor class, but whose interest and whose prosperity is directly linked to the oppressor class position being maintained. And as a result, these groups who may not be at the top of the racial pyramid will still fight to protect it because they are getting some benefits from it, however meager. And they're going to continue to have a guaranteed place, not at the bottom, so long as the system remains standing. Getting others to run interference for a wicked system, that's perhaps the best example of what Dr. John Henrik Clarke called the evil genius of Europe. Duplicity on all levels. So expect to see a number of people who are suddenly pretending to be outraged, and it's not going to be just the usual suspects from the white right. It's also going to be a lot of other individuals who are going to be screaming, why, I'm a person of color, so you can't question my opposition. And these media sock puppets are going to be given an across-the-board platform by the TV stations and the publications. And the main ones, by the way, I think ultimately are going to wind up being black immigrants because that's who they have to push out there. They're going to have to do that. And as we saw at that pathetic farce congressional reparations hearing a few years back, they're going to be pretty bold and strident and shameless about it. But they're also not going to be telling people, oh, these people who are opposing reparations, they happen to be immigrants, so they're not eligible for it anyway, but the white media is going to make sure to leave that out. And I'm talking about the white left media and the white right media. Both of them are going to have the exact same policy that we're going to have black people here who oppose reparations or who otherwise claim reparations should be anything and everything. But we're not going to point out whether or not these people would actually be eligible for it anyway. Fox News, of course, is going to praise these people of color opponents of reparations. CNN and MSNBC, on the other hand, they won't directly praise these critics, but they will give them lots of airtime, will let them spout their opposition to reparations, and won't challenge or disagree with them on it. A huge part of the white media's job is the bounding of debate, as Noam Chomsky put it, to make sure that the discussion never goes outside of certain predetermined boundaries, and that means they have to try to define what counts as reparations. And if they can win that fight, they win the entire argument. We all know the only thing that counts as reparations is cash payments. That's how it is with everyone. But the white media will say that reparations should be things that benefit white corporations and white business interests instead. You know, like housing vouchers, which will be nothing more than a check that you can't cash that has to go directly to the pockets of a white mortgage company and white banks. This is white power giving itself a gift and then claiming that it was for you. And the housing vouchers will be so small they won't even cover the down payment for the house, to say nothing of the total cost. So you got a housing voucher scam that's merely a way to float some quick cash to white lenders and then allow them to take possession of a house that a black person had for only a hot minute. The white media and its bootlicks like roly-poly will say that we should accept the idea that free education somehow counts as reparations. And who will receive the money used to pay for this free education? Why, it will go to white colleges and universities. Or it'll go to some so-called HBCUs whose student body becomes less black by the day, and considering that these places produce people like Kamala Harris and Roly-Poly Martin, I think we can all agree that schools like this don't need more money. But the white media will try to manufacture a false narrative that this is what reparations should be, and they're going to do it by bringing on a steady stream of Negro bootlicks to say it. That's going to be their main strategy. Bring on a parade of phony baloney pretend reparation advocates. That's what the white media will call them, but that's not what they're going to be. They're going to say that some measly housing vouchers or some educational vouchers or some sensitivity training or a couple of PSAs or do business with me. Y'all hire me to be y'all consultant. And that's going to count as reparations. And that, oh, this is what black people really want. Why? We got these meat puppet Negroes over here who are saying this. So obviously they speak for all black people. Well, is that true? The only thing true is that the white media is going to say that. And the white leftist media will pretend that these do-nothing scams are just so extreme. That's the way that they're going to play it. They're going to say, oh, wow, housing vouchers, isn't that just so extreme? They're going to be saying that as phony false opposition. That way, in the event that these do-nothing proposals do become law, then the white media can claim, well, oh, it's just so monumental. This is a game changer. Certainly, this pays for the nation's racial debt. And after all, this is exactly what black people asked for. Why, these Negroes who we pay to be on our show, they were the ones who said it. Remember, white supremacy believes in taking both sides of the conversation. So we got to make sure that this is not a conversation at all. It's going to be a one-sided demand. And the demand is going to be, you can cut the bull and cut the check. The white media is not making any bones that they want to set up a trick bag. They want to control the entire discourse so that they can derail the issue entirely. So don't be surprised when MSNBC has segment after segment with Joe Scarborough and Mika the Bigot Brzezinski saying that they don't understand what they did to black people. And they'll also have on clowns like James Carville, the Cajun Skeletor, as well as Negro Jim Clyburn, and they'll both be going into phony hysterics that reparations is worse than wokeism, and it's going to doom the Democratic Party, and this is the reason why Democrats lose elections, etc., etc. All the same talking points that they used to attack defunding the police, they'll go ahead and recycle those tired old canards and just put in the word reparations instead of defund the police. The same playbook, only they'll be screaming it a lot louder. Now remember, the people who will begin screaming against reparations the most are not some new crop of opponents. The white media is going to say that. They're going to say, oh, look at all these people who you see standing up. These are people who typically wouldn't be saying anything, but doesn't this prove that black people are losing all of this support? Doesn't this prove that you're turning the entire world against you? The only reason you're not seeing all this massive opposition right now is because reparations is a tiny local issue. Outside of, say, the new black media, there's not a whole bunch of people who are thinking that this is going to happen, though the white right has made it clear they can see where the trend is going because we haven't stopped demanding it. All of the beneficiaries of our ancestors' unpaid labor, right now they have no reason to oppose reparations because it's not a major issue. Yet. But as it becomes one, we'll suddenly see a lot of people begin losing their minds. The white media, both left and right, are going to pretend that these are just ordinary people who they have on TV nonstop. These are people who normally are never interested in politics, but reparations is so extreme, so radical, so controversial, so uncalled for that these people became mobilized against it. And because a few loudmouths who the white media cherry picks whine against reparations, why, that means black people are turning the whole nation against them, and they better stop before they ruin it for themselves. That's going to be the white media narrative, that everyone used to like black people, and still we started making these unreasonable demands for reparations. And when does the past get to be the past? That's going to be the white leftist media pushing that line. They won't be doing it as stridently as, say, Fox News, but they're going to be doing it. They're going to be saying everybody hates black people. You're going to be costing Democrats elections. And you guys, you're going to be so unpopular. There's going to be a white lash against the black community. Of course, the opposite is true. Polls going back as far as the 60s show that this country categorically, vehemently opposes anything that benefits black people. From Dr. King's March on Washington to protesting police violence against black people, a large majority of the country, on an instinct, they just automatically oppose anything that black people want simply because black people are the ones making the demand. So the talking point that people are going to oppose reparations simply because it's so unreasonable, simply because these are people who ordinarily would never oppose anything that's in black people's interest, that's a racist lie. And given the nation's history, it actually proves that reparations is exactly what needs to happen. The opposition to reparations is predictable, and the white media will try to make it seem like the entire world is against us, when in reality, it's just the same old group of anti-black racists. They'll bring on their largely bought and paid for opponents to reparations, many, if not most of whom are going to be black themselves, and they will claim that this handful of largely bought and paid for operatives will give legitimacy to the idea that opposing reparations isn't racial. Why, look at all these Asians and Hispanics and Indians and intersectional people. And look, we even have some black immigrants, one or two sock puppets, who claim they had an ancestor in Georgia who was a slave. They say that reparations is a bad idea, so that means it is. That's what they're going to try. So be ready for it, and don't let it discourage you. Reparations won't turn anyone against us. It will merely force everyone who is opposed to black liberation to expose themselves. And that's a good thing. Because ultimately, the people whose voice is going to matter the most will be yours. Good day, and be one. Yesterday marked 1 year since I began this new format of posting Moment of Truth videos every weekday. I want to thank each and every one of you for your continued listenership and helping to support and spread the word. In the past, I don't feel that I thank you guys nearly as often as I should have, which is the reason that I made it a point to salute a few folks every day in specific and to salute all of you as a group every single broadcast. I am not the new black media, and neither are any of the other folks who you listen to. We are simply mouthpieces. You are the new black media itself. The word media is actually a plural. It's a plural for medium. Newspapers are a medium, so is radio. Even television is just a medium. Now, because television has so many stations, that's why TV is referred to as media, even though almost all the TV stations are owned by one of 4 corporations. But it's only when you take all of those mediums together that you actually get the media. Well, the same dynamic goes for us. From podcasting to DVDs to in-person meetings to posting messages online, taking all that you do into account in the aggregate, that's the black media. If you didn't listen to me, I wouldn't be Professor Black Truth. I'd be some nobody chump who was irrelevant. You're the reason I exist, because without you, nobody would even know that I do. I have never seen myself as some wise guy or some smarter-than-thou sage who is uplifting the unworthy masses. That's how bootlicks like Roly-Poly, Tiffany Cross, and Joke Reed see you. I understand that my purpose is to be an advocate for you, to say what you are thinking with all of the eloquence and ferocity that I can muster. I hope that I've been an effective advocate. I hope that I've been worthy of your time, interest, and your trust. I hope you draw as much inspiration from what I've said as I draw encouragement from what you all do. So on this first anniversary mark, I rededicate myself to the advocacy of black empowerment and to the defeat of our enemies. And again, I thank each and every one of you. And now I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. David Green, Burkett Cochrane, Robert Fletcher, Ruger, and Aisha Mwamba. Salute to them, and now more than ever, I thank all of you for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.